Breaking tonight, the White House weighs in on a growing epidemic of violent crime across this country and who is to blame. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. There are horrifying numbers out this week from some of America's biggest cities. Murders up 117% in Milwaukee over this time last year, up 50% in Atlanta, 18% in Chicago. Gun violence of all kinds up 64% in Baltimore. All of this happening as America's cops are increasingly criticized by mainstream media and political leaders from city halls to the U.S. Capitol. And today the White House was asked whether the cops are finally feeling a bit beat down.
Many people attribute these figures to a decline in morale among police.
Well, John, I think anybody who has listened to the president over the last several months has heard the president on a number of occasions talk about the important work that local police officers do in communities all across the country. These are men and women who on a daily basis put on the police uniform and walk out the front door of their home prepared to put their life on the line to keep the community that they serve and protect safe. And that is something that is worthy of our respect. And frankly, it's something that the president has praised. At this point, I'd hesitate to generalize about broader trends that we're seeing across the country. But I do think it speaks to how important it is for law enforcement officers to build trust with the communities that they serve and protect.
So is the president part of the problem? A column just out in the Wall Street Journal argues that while Mr. Obama sometimes praises the police, those remarks almost always go hand in hand with a message about bias, wrongdoing, and racism.
A combination of bad training in some cases, a combination in some cases of departments that really are not trying to root out biases. In a lot of cases, subconscious fear of folks who look different. All of this contributes to a national problem.
Last year, the events in Ferguson and New York exposed a deep-rooted frustration in many communities of color around the need for fair and just law enforcement.
And what happened in Ferguson is not a complete aberration. It's not just a one-time thing. It's something that happens. And one of the things that I think frustrated the people of Ferguson, in addition to the specific case of Michael Brown, was this sense of, you know what, we've been putting up for this for years.
Too many places in this country, black boys and black men, Latino boys, Latino men, they experience being treated differently by law enforcement in stops and in arrests and in charges and incarcerations. The statistics are clear, up and down the criminal justice system. There's no dispute.
Joining me now, Kevin Jackson, Executive Director of The Black Sphere and author of Race Pimping. Also, Richard Fowler, who's a nationally syndicated radio host. Guys, thank you very much for being here. And so, Kevin, you know, the White House comes out today when pressed on these growing crime statistics, and they are devastating across the country. If you look at the number of cities where the murder rate is skyrocketing, and they go to the president. If the police are feeling low on morale, it's not because of anything the president has said or done.
Right. It was interesting how Ernest made it, hey, I don't want to generalize. Well, he should, because you gave enough statistics. And let me tell you, you could have gone city by city, Megyn, and it would have been even worse. Look at the top 10 cities. 2 of them are hotbeds right now. And what's interesting is that Barack Obama keeps using this term communities of color. He acts as if black people got dropped in from outer space and cops don't know what to do with them. It's communities, it's humans, it's people. Cops know how to deal with people. They know how to deal with people who commit crimes. And every time they look at the statistics and talk about the communities of color that are overwhelmingly incarcerated, it's the communities of color who are committing overwhelming crime. It's very simple.
You know, Richard, you look at the piece that was done by the Wall Street Journal yesterday that talks about the Ferguson effect and what it's done to cities across America. Milwaukee homicides up 180%, shootings in St. Louis up 39%, robberies 43%, homicides 25% in Milwaukee, murders in Atlanta up 32%, shootings in Chicago 24% higher, homicides 17%, LA shootings up 25%. In New York, the murder rate is up 13%. I mean, on and on it goes. And they are talking about the surge, the current surge in lawlessness that contrasts with the first 6 months of 2014 that continued a 20-year pattern of growing public safety. You're telling me it has nothing to do with lower cop morale?
Well, then I think there's something here, Megan. I think our nation's reached a tipping point in which, we've sort of reached a point where the police and the community have to have a really, really hard reset. And we've talked about this on your show before. Now more than ever, we should be implementing models like what we see in Camden, New Jersey, where the police have decided to reset and work with the community. We need to bring back officer friendly and put police officers back in the classroom to break down the stigma and the barriers that exist between police departments and communities, whether it's rural communities or inner city communities. It has to be a breakdown.
But the cops listening to that would say, wait a minute, you take certain cities, you throw allegations against an individual cop. The allegations do not withstand legal scrutiny. You get the public ginned up into believing cops are racist officers who need to be stopped. That gets disproven in many of these instances. And then your answer is, we really need to come together, and people need to be taught that, and the police need to teach them that they're not bad. I mean, Kevin, the police are saying, wait a minute, you're the ones who created the image that we are bad in a lot of these cases.
Oh, and no doubt about it. Look, before the surge, Megan, there was already a surge. Detroit, 5 times the crime rate of the average town. And on down the line, I mean, we're talking about 2 to 3 times the nation's average for violent crime in these cities prior to the surge. And these people act like it's been the cops. If the cops should be at fault because the cops haven't been dealing with this crime. Now, I don't blame them because it's bureaucrats that have implemented these policies of don't stop and frisk and no racial profiling and things like this.
Well, because racial profiling doesn't work, Kevin. I mean, you look at the you look at the Department of Justice report both in Cleveland and Ferguson, and both of them point out that when you have more racial profiling, when you have zero tolerance, you have more racism and bias. In the Ferguson Department of Justice report, they indicated emails where police officers are using racial epithets to describe the community.
That's true. That's absolutely true. But let me ask you this, Richard, because the White House is coming out today sort of saying, hey, the president has been very supportive of the police. And as we point out, he hasn't. And he's been hit not just for always seeming to couch his praise of them with, but they're also very biased and very discriminatory against black men. But he's been accused of a rush to judgment against the police almost since he took office, dating back to what happened with Professor Henry Louis Gates and what he said about, well, listen.
Well, the Cambridge police acted stupidly. There is a long history in this country of African Americans and Latinos being stopped by law enforcement disproportionately. And that's just a fact. If I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon.
I mean, is he ignoring history when Josh Earnest comes out today and says, the president's been a big supporter?
Well, there's other clips, Megan. Just a couple weeks ago, the president was on the Capitol where he praised police officers for the work they do. And he talked about how as a nation we need to work on breaking down poverty and the issues that get us to more crime. So I think this president has to, let's be honest, he has to walk a very, very fine line between uplifting the cops, but also talking about what the Department of Justice is finding in cities across the country.
Let me ask, has the Department of Justice ever gone into a police department, Kevin, and found that they didn't have a pattern of discrimination under this president? Has it ever once happened that they went in and said, what, you're good. I don't know what we're doing here?
No, and they never will. And as you've already indicated, there's always going to be a but after it. You're never going to hear Barack Obama talk about the many acts of kindness that cops do every single day.
That's just not true.
Well, he does talk about that, though, Kevin. He does talk about that. The question is whether it's always couched or too often couched with a criticism.
You didn't let me finish. That's right. You didn't let me finish. Exactly that. He never says that, hey, this is what these guys do day in and day out without the but. And that's the problem. And so what he's done is he's created a climate where black people are snitches get stitches, and you've got cops being surrounded when they go to just to do a call. You stop it.
If I remember correctly, the president,
they're being shot in higher numbers.
If I remember correctly, the president was on the ground with Chris Christie. The president was on the ground with Chris Christie in Camden, New Jersey, talking about how effective their program is, how effective their reset has been.
Well, Chris Christie
working
wasn't
with the
there that day
community.
because he was with me in New Hampshire. However, the president did go to Camden. The thing is, in Camden, they have a terribly high murder rate. Something had to be done, so all the cops got fired, and then they doubled the police force. They doubled the number of police, and guess what? The murder rate went down. And guess what?
Yeah,
what a shock. More cops led to fewer murders.
Oh, of course, but beyond having more cops there, Megan, they also implemented true community policing, where they started to have a conversation with the community on how they want to be policed.
But the conversation is usually much more effective when the police force is double the size. We're going to have to listen to them.
Hey, Megan, let me tell you, right here in Missouri, they talked about having the cops do non-lethals. They had two people that were shot with tasers, and the very first thing that happened was everybody complained about that. These people, it's never going to be enough for the left. They can't just say, you know what, this is bad policy. And it's hurting communities.
No, what's bad policy is stop and frisk, zero tolerance. That's what bad policy is, Kevin, and you know it.
Great to see you both. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan.
Also tonight, less than 24 hours before we sit down